Miroslav Miro Sokolov had nearly forgotten the taste of fear. For 2 decades, he had tended farmland on Conventum Delta, watching alien crops sway under gentle suns. Many nights, he'd sip contraband whiskey so strong it could strip paint off a battleship's hull, listening to his wife, Esme, laugh at his corny, half-drunken jokes. Their children, Zanai and Tyro, never suspected that Papa Miro was once the infamous Baba Yaga, a human warlord whispered about in nightmares across the galaxy. Yet here he was, kneeling in the dust, staring at the smoking remains of his modest ranch house as Imperial troopers marched away. He could still smell ozone from scorched plasteel and feel the static crackle of spent blaster charges. Hours earlier, Miro had hidden in the wilderness with a neighbor's child. He had planned to shelter them during the Empire's so-called compliance inspection. When he'd returned, he discovered the troopers had dealt with potential threats. Among the casualties were his teenage son, Tyro, and little Zanai, barely old enough to read properly. The children's lifeless bodies were left in the yard like garbage. Miro's hands trembled, not with grief alone but with simmering rage. He hadn't felt this kind of raw fury since his final battle 20 years ago, when he'd single-handedly destroyed an entire orbital blockade to secure safe passage for human refugees. He had walked away from that chaos vowing to never again stain his hands with blood. But this, losing Tyro and Zanai. The Empire had spat on his promise of peace. Calaragnagio, the local alien elder, approached cautiously. A slender figure with angular features and grayish skin, Calarak laid a trembling hand on Miro's shoulder. "I am sorry," they whispered, voice choked with empathy. "We had no warning they'd slaughter children. We thought they were only searching for insurgents." Miro gave no answer at first. His eyes remained locked on the blackened soil. Small footprints, etched in dust, belonged to Zanai when she used to run barefoot at dawn. A deeper set belonged to Tyro, who would follow her anywhere. Their final footprints ended in a scorched crater, courtesy of an Imperial trooper's weapon. A single tear threatened to spill from Miro's eye, but it evaporated with a sizzling, pent-up rage. "Are you going to fight them?" Calarak's question was barely above a whisper, as if they already knew the answer. Everyone on Conventum Delta had heard rumors about Miro's past, but they'd seen no proof. Just a tall, quiet man with sad eyes and a farmer's gentle hands. "Yes," Miro said at last. His voice was a low rumble, like a distant avalanche. "I'm going to fight them, Calarak. Every last one of those bastards." In truth, Miro had never intended to be known as the Baba Yaga again. He tried burying that moniker, along with piles of war-torn regrets. He had even gotten rid of his old warblades, burying them in desert dunes on some nameless planet so he wouldn't be tempted. Unfortunately, the Empire had just thrown all his good intentions into the incinerator. "Let me help," Calarak ventured, sounding more terrified than confident. "There's a network of alien settlers who can get messages off-world." "They—" "No," Miro cut them off, though not unkindly. "Send word to humans. To my old friends. We will need every able hand." He paused, forcing down a cocktail of sadness and fury that churned in his gut. "And keep your people safe. The Empire will come back looking for scapegoats. Anyone near me will be in danger." In the horizon's fading light, Miro could see the silhouette of Commander Serene Valder's Imperial craft departing. That pompous officer had likely led the strike team, wanting to show off the Empire's might against a primitive frontier settlement. They had no idea who they'd just provoked. A bitter, humorless laugh almost escaped Miro's lips. Baba Yaga, the bogeyman, was officially out of retirement. A flicker of guilt gnawed him for what lay ahead. He'd promised Esme, on her deathbed 2 years ago, that he'd never revert to that savage he once was. But how could he stand idle after his children's blood stained the ground? So he rose, spine rigid as a starship hull, and muttered, "I'll tear them apart." That night, by the light of Conventum Delta's twin moons, Miroslav Sokolov dug up a rusted old footlocker hidden beneath a false floor in his barn. Inside lay the ghost of his past, an old Imperial trench knife, a battered plasma revolver, and a ragged cloak embroidered with the symbol of a crow's skull. He slipped the cloak over his broad shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of destiny pressing down. The storm was coming, and he was prepared to bring hell with it. News traveled faster than cheap gossip at a spaceport casino, a rumor that some feral human warlord was raising hell on Conventum Delta. It reached the wrong ears, or perhaps the right ears, depending on your perspective, on Joven's Gate, an Imperial stronghold planet known for its luxurious officer retreats and goddess-tier strip clubs catering to every species. Commander Serene Valdar, a woman with the poise of a supermodel and the moral compass of a black hole, sipped an obscenely expensive cocktail. She swirled the glass, admiring the shimmering gold flecks. "I deserve every ounce of this," she purred. After all, she had just returned from a successful compliance operation on Conventum Delta. She'd seized contraband, displayed the Empire's might, and cleansed potential human threats. So what if those threats were kids? The official log would read, "Eliminated lawless insurgents." Valdar was certain her superiors would pat her on the back and possibly promote her. Then an urgent holo transmission came in. She cursed under her breath, something anatomically explicit about a space squid and a hamster, before stepping outside the club to take the call. Her face twisted in annoyance as she recognized Colonel Heron, that officious stooge from intelligence. "Commander Valdar," Colonel Heron began, voice crackling through static, "we have a problem. Our recon picks up talk of Baba Yaga on Conventum Delta. Seems your team killed 2 children connected to him. You might have awakened a hornet's nest." Valdar snorted. "Baba Yaga? What's that, some cosmic boogeyman?" "In this case, yes," Heron said grimly. "He's an ex-human warlord known for wiping out entire fleets single-handedly. If the intelligence is correct, you may have just painted a target on your back." She rolled her eyes, but a bead of sweat formed at her temple. Despite her bravado, the stories of unstoppable human fighters were well known among career officers. "What are you suggesting, Colonel?" she asked, feigning calm. "Secure the region. Capture or kill him. The Empire wants no resurgence of these legends. If you succeed, you'll be a hero of the Imperial Court." That caught Valdar's attention. A hero. She could practically smell the power and the flattering aroma of a bigger paycheck wafting toward her. "Understood. I'll finish this Baba Yaga myself." Cutting the transmission, she hurried to her private shuttle, her half-finished golden cocktail abandoned. Meanwhile, on Conventum Delta, Miro was already preparing. The dusty settlement's main saloon became his temporary command center. It wasn't exactly a state-of-the-art fortress, just a rundown bar featuring questionable liquor and a rickety stage where traveling performers used to belt out tunes of heartbreak and longing. Miro growled at the memory of simpler times. "We've got a half-dozen ex-rebels, a handful of local militia, and a drunk who claims to be a demolitions expert," said Darrow Tannick, a ragged ex-mercenary who had once fought alongside Miro. "Demolitions expert my ass," Miro muttered, eyeing the old codger swaying on his barstool. "Still, we'll take what we can get." Darrow half smiled. "So you're back in the saddle, old friend? I never thought I'd see the day." "Neither did I," Miro replied. His gaze drifted to the battered cloak draped over the bar counter, the crow's skull emblem watching him like a silent judge. "But the Empire has a way of pissing me off." A volley of questions rattled Miro's mind. How big was Valdar's returning strike force? Would they bomb the settlement from orbit this time? Could he protect these people? Despite his thirst for vengeance, he felt a pang of responsibility for every living being on Conventum Delta, aliens and humans alike. "I heard you once fought with a plasma sword rumored to slice clean through starship holes," Darrow ventured, tone reverent. Miro's lips twitched in a humorless grin. "It's hidden in the barren expanse. Buried. Along with other relics from my war days. We'll retrieve them, soon." "We might need them sooner than you think," Darrow cautioned, pointing out the window. Across the sun-scorched plains, dust clouds billowed, likely from Imperial scout bikes or assault vehicles. They were coming. Miro stood, massaging the tension in his shoulders. Then let's give them a welcome they won't forget. He turned to the old drunk demolitions guy, who promptly belched and raised his glass. "Hey, old-timer," Miro called. "I hope your bombs pack more punch than that piss water you're drinking." The man cackled. "Careful, son. My explosives are like ex-wives, unstable and prone to blow up in your face if you don't handle them right." Miro barked a short laugh, one tinged with bitterness yet laced with just enough wry amusement to spark hope. This ragged group of misfits might be all that stood between the Empire and the innocent. And he, the infamous Baba Yaga, was determined not to lose any more children, no matter whose they were. The trek to the barren expanse was a silent, gut-churning journey. Miro led a small squad, Darrow Tannic, the half-drunken demolitions expert named Old Misha, and 2 alien locals who insisted on helping. They navigated eroded gorges and broken plateaus under scorching suns. Anyone else feel like their crotch is being slow-roasted? Old Misha grumbled, adjusting the tattered scarf around his neck. "Because I could swear my nether regions have achieved medium well." One of the aliens, Coradil, a tall reptilian with luminescent stripes, coughed politely. "Could we refrain from discussing cooked genitalia? Some of us have refined palates." "Refined? On Conventum Delta?" Miro quipped, half smiling despite himself. Moments of levity were precious in times like these. After hours of trudging, they came upon a hidden cavern marked by an unremarkable rock formation. Miro traced his fingers along a crevice, triggering a concealed mechanism. A metal hatch hissed open, revealing a subterranean chamber that reeked of stale air and old memories. The group descended, flashlights illuminating crates stacked high with archaic weaponry, armor plating, and ammunition caked in dust. Among them was the crowning jewel, a plasma sword with an obsidian handle etched in swirling patterns, rumored to be unstoppable in the right hands. "Holy flaming balls of Titan," Old Misha breathed, eyes wide. "That thing real?" Miro retrieved the sword gingerly, pressing a hidden switch. A glowing blade of iridescent energy burst forth, humming with lethal promise. Dust motes sparkled in the shifting light. "Real enough to carve starship armor," Miro murmured. As he powered it down, his mind drifted to Tyro. His son had once asked about the legends of unstoppable swords. "Are they real, Papa?" Tyro would beg. Miro had always shrugged, giving him a half-truth. The boy had no idea his father had one tucked away. Darrow, scanning other crates, whistled softly. "Grenade launchers, plasma rifles, sniper rails, this is an armory fit for toppling a regime, Miro." Miro's jaw clenched. That's the idea, he thought. Though part of him hesitated, he'd fought so hard to bury these weapons and the killer he'd been. But every time he pictured Zanai's small form lying still, where Tyro's eyes locked in terror, a fresh wave of rage urged him on. "We'll load up as much as we can carry," he said aloud, voice echoing. "Darrow, get a comm link to Calorock. Let them know we'll be ready to push back if Valder's forces land." Darrow nodded, rummaging for a functioning transmitter. Meanwhile, old Misha set about inspecting a cluster of outdated bombs with all the enthusiasm of a child opening holiday presents. "These beauties might be old," he cackled, "but trust me, they'll make one hell of a bang. Like my third marriage, short, volatile, and ended with an explosion." Coradil arched an alien brow. "Your species does marriage so strangely." "No argument there," Miro muttered. "But when we unite for a cause, like vengeance or freedom, we're unstoppable." His chest tightened in a mixture of pride and mourning. Humanity had that stubborn streak, that reckless courage, and it was about to be unleashed on the Empire once more. As they hauled crates to the surface, Miro received word from Calorock through Darrow's communicator. Commander Valdar had arrived. Her starships circled above the settlement, broadcasting demands for surrender. Civilians were ordered to turn over the human known as the Baba Yaga or face planetary bombardment. They want to bomb the entire planet for one man? Coradil exclaimed, outraged. Miro's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. No more innocents will die because of me. We fight. With that, they set out across the barren expanse, hauling the relic arsenal. The dusty wind whipped at their hair and scales, stinging their eyes. Overhead, dawn began to break, painting the sky in stripes of red and orange, an omen of bloodshed, perhaps. Deep inside, Miro wrestled with his guilt. If he had just revealed his identity earlier, could he have prevented his children's deaths? Would the Empire have left them alone, knowing the devil they provoke? The regret was like a knife twisting in his gut. But that regret now fueled him. He refused to let the Empire get away with murdering more children. They had shattered his life, he would dismantle their tyranny. As they neared the settlement's outskirts, Miro ignited the plasma sword once more, its glow cutting through the dawn haze. Time to give Valdar a lesson in consequences, he said quietly. Behind him, his ragtag team braced themselves for a storm of violence. Commander Serene Valdar stood atop her mobile command platform, flanked by squadrons of heavily armed troopers and hover tanks. The settlement's dirt roads teemed with grey-clad Imperial might. Her polished boots rested on a trembling local's back, an unsubtle display of dominion. She raised a bullhorn. Baba Yaga, surrender now, or I bomb this mudhole into the next galaxy. Valdar's voice echoed, dripping with arrogance. She stole a quick glance at the trooper controlling the orbital strike panel, as if verifying her threat was loaded and ready. No response came, just the wind blowing grit against plated armor. Then, from a far corner near the old saloon, a brilliant slash of plasma lit the air. Miro stepped into view, cloak fluttering behind him like a ragged shadow. At his sides, the ragtag militia fanned out, sporting repurposed rifles and improvised explosives. Looking for me? Miro's deep voice rumbled across the clearing. A hush fell as troopers caught sight of the glowing sword. Whispers spread like wildfire, that's him. The warlord. The demon. Even Valdar felt a shiver. You're outnumbered, she sneered, brandishing a sleek pistol. You can't possibly. Her words were cut off by old Misha lobbing a homemade grenade at a squad of troopers. The resulting blast was deafening, scattering bodies and mechanical parts in every direction. You talk too much, lady, he hollered, cackling like a madman. Boom, baby. Chaos erupted. Blaster fire crisscrossed the settlement. Tanks rumbled forward, dust clouds swirling around them. Miro charged at an advancing squad, plasma sword singing through the air. He moved with lethal grace, slicing through armor as if it were butter. Each kill weighed on him, but every Imperial soldier that fell meant fewer threats to the innocents behind him. Hoverbikes screamed overhead, trying to strafe Miro's position. Darrow fired a railgun, sending one bike spiraling in flames into a half-collapsed barn. Another hovered dangerously low, until Coradil leapt onto it with surprising agility, yanking the trooper off and smashing him to the ground in a graceless tangle of limbs. I've had scarier hangovers. Coradil roared, letting out an alien battle cry that rattled teeth. Meanwhile, Valdar barked orders for the tanks to surround Miro. She typed frantic commands into her hollow wristband, coordinating an orbital strike. If I can't have his head, I'll turn this entire planet into ashes, she hissed. Not so fast, came a mocking voice from behind her. Calaragnagio and a handful of settlers had circled around, sabotaging the command platform's interface. Sparks flew as the main console shorted out, severing Valdar's link to the orbiting battleship. You meddling aliens! Valdar shrieked, spinning around to fire. She managed a single shot, grazing Calaroc's arm. Before she could line up another, Miro's plasma sword crashed down, slicing her prized pistol in half. Her eyes went wide. You murdered my children, Miro growled. He pinned Valdar with a gaze that looked more beast than man. They were no threat to you. Valdar swallowed hard but refused to cower, curling her lip in defiance. Imperial orders, eliminate potential insurgents. No exceptions. That's how we maintain control. Miro's hand shook. For a moment, he longed to deliver swift retribution, to strike her down like she had his kids. But he recalled Tyro's sweet smile and Zanai's gentle nature. They deserved a future where violence wasn't the only answer. Perhaps he could break the cycle, if only a little. Get out, he spat, lowering the sword to her throat but not finishing the job. Tell your empire what happens when they trample innocent lives. If you return, there won't be enough pieces of you left to fill a matchbox. Valder's eyes burned with hatred. She slowly retreated, calling to the remnants of her troops to retreat as well. Smoke and debris filled the settlement, the ground littered with groaning, wounded Imperials. Many had already fled. A heavy, stunned silence fell. The battered townsfolk emerged from hiding, both human and alien. As adrenaline ebbed, Miro's knees nearly buckled. Darrow clapped a hand on his shoulder. You did it, he said quietly. Miro closed his eyes. He hadn't done it alone, the entire settlement had stood up for itself. He looked at Calorok, cradling their injured arm yet holding steady. He looked at old Misha, who was busily trying to salvage leftover explosives and mumbling about my masterpiece still has some spark. We held the line, Miro finally said, voice hoarse. But the Empire won't forget this. I expect they'll come back with more. Then we'll be ready, Calorok replied, and Darrow nodded. Miro walked to the edge of the settlement, gazing into the distance. Twin suns peeked through drifting smoke, painting the sky a bruised pink. A new dawn, indeed, one stained by blood yet brimming with stubborn hope. The Baba Yaga was no longer dormant. He would fight for every child, every innocent, as long as he lived. And if the Empire wanted a war, he'd give them one they'd never forget.